You're about to hear a story that is not myth, not folklore, not some campfire legend carried by soldiers. No, this one happened. This one is documented. This one left behind witnesses whose voices trembled decades later when they tried to talk about what they saw. And the strangest part? Most people today have never heard the full, horrifying version. Tonight we're going back to the Western Front, World War I, April 22nd, 1915, near a small Belgian town called Ypres, a place where the world saw something new, something that looked alive, something that rolled across the field with a mind of its own, something that changed war forever. The soldiers who survived called it the Green Mist. What it did to the human body, what it did to the human mind, what it did to the world, that's the horror you're about to hear. This is the true story of the first chlorine gas attack, one of the scariest real military scenes ever recorded. Imagine spending months inside a ditch carved through dead farmland, a trench that stank of rot, mud, and fear. The walls were wet. The floor was a soup of mud, urine, and whatever leaked from the bodies that couldn't be recovered. Rats the size of house cats ran over the boots of sleeping soldiers. Lice crawled under collars. Shells screamed overhead day and night. And through it all, a silence lived between the artillery blasts. A silence made of waiting. Waiting for something to happen. Waiting for orders. Waiting for death. By the spring of 1915, the Allies in the Ypres salient had grown used to the monotony of misery. British, French, Canadian, Algerian, and Senegalese soldiers held the line. Tired, underfed, but stubborn. On the other side of no man's land, the German forces waited too. But they were preparing something the world had never seen before. The soldiers on the Allied side had no idea how close they were to becoming part of an experiment. German troops noticed something strange weeks before the attack. Behind their trenches, heavy wagons were dragged into position under the cover of night. The wheels didn't squeal. The horses wore padded hooves. Everything was done in silence. And on those wagons were huge cylindrical tanks, sealed with thick metal caps. Word spread among the German soldiers. This is the Kaiser's new weapon. It will end the war in a single day. The wind will carry it. Some men grew nervous. Others were excited. A few whispered that it wasn't natural, that war shouldn't go this far. But one thing was certain. The Germans weren't launching shells. They were preparing to release the air itself as a weapon. And the wind, that was the crucial ingredient. For days, German meteorologists monitored it. Not too fast, not too slow. It had to blow directly toward the Allied trenches. On April 22nd, late afternoon, the conditions were perfect. On the Allied side, near the small village of Langemarck, soldiers were settling into the evening. The sun hung low, turning the sky a warm orange. It should have been beautiful. But something about that sunset made men uneasy. A few Algerian troops crossed themselves. Others muttered prayers. A young French private wrote in his diary that the air felt too still, too warm, like before a thunderstorm. That was the first sign. Just after 5 p.m., the second sign came, a distant metallic clanging from the German trenches. Nobody understood what it meant, but they would. Whatever the Germans were doing, it was the beginning of the end. One witness described it perfectly. It sounded like someone tearing open the world. A long, low metallic hiss rolled across the battlefield. Not like artillery, not like rifles, more like steam escaping a giant kettle. Every soldier in every trench across a 4-mile front heard it. Men stood up, looked around, waited for an explosion, but nothing came, just the hiss. And then someone shouted, "Look! Look at the German lines!" At first it was faint, a thin strip of pale green smoke, curling upward like fingers reaching from the earth. Then it thickened, widened, spread, and began rolling across no man's land. Not blowing, not drifting, rolling, as if it were alive. Eyewitnesses said it looked like a great tidal wave of ghostly green, hugging the ground, moving fast but silently. The wind carried it, straight toward the Allied trenches. Some soldiers froze. Others tried making sense of it. A Canadian sergeant yelled, "It's smoke! They're burning something!" A French corporal thought it was a smokescreen for an infantry attack. An Algerian soldier dropped his rifle and ran. A few men aimed rifles at it, as if you could shoot a cloud. But the officers didn't know what it was. Nobody did, until the first line of the mist touched the trench. And then the screaming started. The green cloud hit like a wall. The first effect was the smell. Witnesses described it as pepper mixed with bleach, a burning odor, like 1,000 cleaning chemicals at once. Then came the pain. Chlorine gas reacts with moisture, and the human body is full of moisture, eyes, throat, lungs. As soon as the gas touched the soldiers, it felt like inhaling fire. Men grabbed their throats, scratched at their eyes, collapsed to their knees. Those who tried to breathe felt their lungs seize. Those who tried to scream inhaled more gas. One soldier's account said, "It felt like drowning on dry land." Another said, "My lungs were filling, not with air, but with acid." Some collapsed instantly. Others staggered blindly through the trench, coughing up foam. The mist moved forward relentlessly, swallowing everything. And behind it, the Germans were watching. The French 45th Division, made up largely of Algerian and Moroccan troops, took the brunt of the attack. Most had never seen anything like it. No one had masks. There was no training, no warning. Men climbed out of the trench, desperate to escape the green fog. Some ran toward the Germans. Some ran into no man's land. Some ran until their bodies simply gave out. A witness described soldiers clawing at their own necks, trying to make a hole to breathe through. Another said, they were dying standing up. Their eyes were open, their skin turning colors. The gas kept moving, rolling into reserve trenches, cooking lungs one breath at a time. Officers tried shouting orders, but could barely speak. The line, 4 miles long, began to collapse. Not because the soldiers were cowards, but because they were human, and humans can't fight a cloud they can't shoot. To the north, the 1st Canadian Division heard the screams. They saw soldiers running, eyes swollen, coughing blood, collapsing mid-stride. They didn't know what the green cloud was, but they knew one thing. If they ran, Ypres would fall. And if Ypres fell, the road to the English Channel was open. And so, the Canadians stayed. Men tore cloth from their shirts, soaked it in water, in urine, in anything they had, and tied it over their faces as primitive gas masks. A doctor shouted, "Piss on your handkerchiefs! Chlorine reacts with ammonia." Some screamed back, "There's not enough piss in the world for this." But they did it anyway, because it was the only chance they had. The gas burned their eyes. Their lungs felt raw. Breathing hurt, but they held. While the green mist swallowed the field around them, the Canadians stood in the broken trenches, coughing and wheezing, waiting for the German infantry that never came. Yes, here's the twist. The Germans weren't prepared for their own weapons' success. They watched the Allies break. They saw the 4-mile gap. They could have marched straight through, but they were afraid the gas would blow back onto them. They didn't trust the weapon, and they weren't ready. So the Canadians held the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Barely. Once the gas cleared, once the wind shifted, the battlefield became something out of a nightmare. Bodies lay in positions that didn't make sense. Arms curled, backs arched, faces frozen. Some looked peaceful. Others looked like they were still trying to scream. Medical soldiers described finding men whose skin had turned strange shades, eyes were swollen shut, lips were discolored, lungs sounded like wet paper when they moved the bodies. Nothing could have prepared them. One Canadian medic wrote, "We walked through a field of men who were dead but still warm, their faces twisted as if something terrified them long after life left the body." Another, "Some had foam around their mouths, thick foam, yellow-green. But the most horrifying thing was the silence. No artillery, no gunshots, no shouting, just the wind and bodies, hundreds, maybe thousands." The green mist had done what bullets and shells could not. The gas didn't just kill, it changed the survivors. Men who lived through the first gas attack often suffered for the rest of their lives. Permanent lung damage, chronic coughing, blindness, nightmares, fear of fog, of smoke, of anything greenish in the air. Some soldiers couldn't walk uphill without collapsing. Some could never speak normally again. Many describe waking up years later, gasping for air, even though the war was long over. It wasn't just a military event, it was a psychological scar. The world realized something that day. Humans had learned how to weaponize the atmosphere itself. At the time, newspapers downplayed the horror. Governments wanted to avoid panic. They called it a new type of gas, a tactical surprise or an unfortunate loss. But the soldiers knew better. They called it the breath of death, the green ghost, the mist that screams. Stories spread through trenches, whispers of men who stayed upright for minutes after dying, of birds dropping mid-flight, of animals fleeing the forest days before the attack. Were all the stories true? Maybe not, but fear doesn't care about accuracy. And chlorine gas had made fear into a physical thing, something soldiers could choke on. The first attack was only the beginning. Over the next years of World War I, both sides used gas. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard, each one worse than the last. Gas became part of the landscape, an invisible predator hiding inside every morning mist, every low cloud, every drizzle of rain. Soldiers lived with the constant dread of seeing that greenish-yellow fog sliding toward them again, and many did, over and over. One Canadian soldier, Private C.W. Loney, survived the first chlorine attack. Years later, in a shaky voice, he described what he saw. "I saw men drowning without water. I saw men digging fingernail marks into their throats trying to pull the air in. I saw eyes that didn't blink anymore. And the worst part was the sound, a wet, bubbling breath, like the lungs were melting." He paused, then added, "We didn't know hell until that day, and hell didn't need fire. It needed only the wind." That line stayed with me. Whenever people read about the first gas attack, they ask, why didn't the soldiers just run? The truth is chilling. Many did, and died faster. Chlorine is heavier than air. It settles in low ground. So trenches, meant to protect, became death traps. Those who climbed out ran into bullets. Those who stayed inhaled the gas. Those who hid behind sandbags found the gas creeping around them anyway. There was no right answer, only survival by chance. And that's what makes this story so terrifying. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a fight. It was a trap set by the air itself. The Algerian, Moroccan, Senegalese, and French colonial troops who died that day were among the first victims of chemical warfare in modern history. Many had no idea such a weapon existed. Many were far from home. Many were buried without names. Their sacrifice held the line long enough for reinforcements to stabilize the front. They are rarely mentioned, rarely honored, rarely remembered. But they were there, and they faced the worst of the green mist. After the war ended, the world was horrified by what chemical weapons had done. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 banned their use. But bans don't erase memories. Veterans of Ypres said the smell of chlorine, like bleach or pool cleaner, could send them into panic attacks decades later. Some never walked near swimming pools again. Some avoided humid environments. Some couldn't breathe through their noses because the damage was permanent. The green mist never truly left them. I want you to imagine this last moment with me. A French officer, coughing violently, climbs from the collapsed trench. His vision is blurry. His throat burns. He can barely stand. He looks back. He sees the green fog thinning, drifting away. And behind it, he sees hundreds of men lying motionless. Some slumped against the trench wall. Some sprawled in the mud. Some still clutching their rifles. All silent. The officer falls to his knees, not from the gas, but from the realization nothing in the world would ever be the same. War had changed. Humanity had changed. And the air itself was no longer safe. That was the scariest part. Not the deaths, not the cloud, not the screams, but the understanding that what they witnessed was only the beginning. That is the true story of one of the most horrifying military scenes in human history. April 22nd, 1915. Ypres, Belgium. The day the green mist came, a real event, A moment when the world crossed a line it could never uncross. A moment when soldiers faced a weapon they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. A moment of pure, true military horror. If you want more true military stories like this, the forgotten, the hidden, the chilling, let me know in the comments. And remember, some of the scariest stories are the ones that actually happened.